You're listening to
DNA ID.
Brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On Sunday, September 3rd, 1989, Steve Lethan, the owner of the building housing the Good and Loud music store at 5225 University Avenue in Madison, Wisconsin, was trying to fix a leak when he made a truly strange and unsettling discovery. He had removed a boiler in the building's basement and noticed water leaking from a clay-lined boiler ventilation chimney cleanout pipe onto the basement floor. Peering in to see what the situation was, Lethan saw a human skull and scapula right at the base of the chimney. That was not what he expected. According to Madison magazine, Lethan called the non-emergency general police number. "I believe I've found human remains," he said. "Is the person breathing?" the operator asked. "I really don't think so," Lethan replied. Dane County authorities were called in, including Detective James Gran. Gran later told Madison magazine, quote, "It was probably the smallest crime scene I've ever seen. The whole crime scene was a 25 by 11-inch pipe." The skeleton was not accessible by the policemen standing in the basement. The base of the chimney was almost underground. The investigation was delayed while a construction crew with the requisite equipment was brought in. That was frustrating, Detective Gran said. The construction crew used a backhoe to dig into the basement from the street, digging deep into the roadway and tunneling into the chimney, excavating around the chimney, and bashing a hole in it from the bottom to access the compartment inside. Finally, an intact human skeleton compacted into a 20-inch pile of detached bones was removed from the chimney. An investigation by University of Wisconsin anthropology professor Kenneth Bennett revealed the following about the person in the chimney. The skeleton belonged to a white male, aged 20 to 22, who was about 5'5" to 5'7" with a very thin build. His hair was brown and worn about 4 inches long, but his eye color could not be determined. A description of the young man, who had no identification on him, on the Doe network specified that he had a narrow nose, a strong jawline, and a pronounced overbite. Dr. Bennett could not fix the time of death for the young man, nicknamed Chimney Doe. He was estimated to have been dead anywhere from 2 to 24 months. Nor could Chimney Doe's cause of death be determined. Police reports note that Chimney Doe could not have entered the chimney from within the building. He had to have gone in from up above. The fact that he was stuffed down a chimney that measured 11.94 inches wide gave rise to a couple of theories. That he was a burglar trying to break into the music store, that he had died after being shoved alive into the chimney, or that someone had killed him and placed him in the chimney to hide him. The latter theory was embraced by lead homicide detective James Gran because no one could believe anyone would choose to go into that chimney, which was 27 feet tall. But as reported in the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, Coroner Ray Wosepka said Tuesday night that law enforcement officials couldn't yet determine whether foul play was involved. "The case is unusual," he said. "It's the first time I've dealt with this," said Wosepka. "It's not very often you find human remains at the bottom of a chimney." Notably, Chimney Doe's pelvic bones were severely broken at a time right before death, Dr. Bennett determined. These injuries were not consistent with a fall or slide down the chimney, and were instead believed to have come from being forcefully beaten or stomped on the front of the body by someone. The Capital Times stated, quote, "The only sign of injury to the bones is a crushed lower pelvis, which indicates the genitalia of the victim were stomped on before he was shoved into the chimney. according to Madison Police Lieutenant Tim Endress. The pelvic injury indicated that the victim was lying on the ground and that his assailant probably stomped on him, Endress said. That theory is based on the fact that the lower girdle of the pelvis is broken. If the victim had been kicked in the groin, the smaller bones of the upper girdle would have been broken, Endress said. The bones were broken with a straight-on blow, said Endress, making the stomping theory more plausible. All that from the Capital Times. But it was the clothing found with the skeleton that raised eyebrows. Scraps of clothing were found in the chimney with the Doe, and some of them were intact. When a garment that was in rags was pieced back together, the investigators believed they were looking at a sleeveless paisley dress with a matching belt. Also found were a long-sleeved button-down shirt that may have been made of Oxford-type cloth, a medium-sized white Stag brand shaggy pile sweater, and pointed leather shoes, which I will say looked to me like a man's work boot-style leather shoes, but were reported as having a low heel. Chimney Doe was wearing one pair of socks. The foot bones were found still inside, and another pair was found with him. He was not wearing underwear or a bra. Detective Grand told the Wisconsin State Journal, "We don't have any pants or evidence of pants. We have a male's bones and a dress." Additional items found with the skeleton were a German Iron Cross medallion that could have been worn on a leather necklace that had disintegrated, a butter knife, and a pocket comb. The butter knife was thought to have been a tool possibly carried by Chimney Doe in order to break into a locked store. But in the minds of police, Chimney Doe's attire, the supposed dress, and no pants, pretty much ruled out the burglar theory. As lead detective James Grand told the Wisconsin State Journal in October 1989, quote, "It wasn't a go out and do a burglary type of outfit." Also, there were no ropes or pulleys found. If Chimney Doe had gone into the chimney voluntarily, he had to know he had no way to get out. And he likely could not have climbed into the chimney with a broken pelvis anyway. Finally, would it have been worth it to squeeze into an 11-inch wide chimney to burgle a religious collectibles store, the tenant, until the very recent sale of the building? Police were stumped about what was going on with Chimney Doe. They actually told the media they were now second-guessing the anthropologist's determination that the bones belonged to a man. They called University of Wisconsin anthropology professor Kenneth Bennett back to re-examine the bones in light of the clothing find. Bennett said to the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, "Everything I said before stands. I don't have any explanation for the clothing. There's all kinds of funny people out there nowadays. But the skeletal remains were male, there's no doubt about it." Well, questions persisted. If Chimney Doe was a man, why was he wearing women's clothes? Was this a Halloween costume? Was it a University of Wisconsin fraternity prank gone very wrong? Was the extra pair of socks intended to be stuffed into a bra to give the appearance of breasts? And if so, where was the bra? Why and how did Chimney Doe get into the chimney? Was this a hate crime? Had someone killed him in the parking lot of the 24-hour diner next door in a fit of rage after discovering that he was a man and carried him up to the roof to shove him down the chimney? As the Wisconsin State Journal put it, quote, "One hypothesis, and it's only that, is that it was inflicted by somebody obviously unhappy with the cross-dresser," end quote. The commercial building where Chimney Doe was found had been constructed in the 1960s out of cinder block. When Chimney Doe was found, it housed the Good and Loud music store and Ken's card shop, a sports collectibles store. But both were new tenants. Police speculated that the odor of decomposition had been masked by the fact that the tenants in the building had included a bakery called the Pastry Cart. But that was well before Chimney Doe was thought to have died. According to the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, "From August 1984 to December 1988, the building where Chimney Doe was found housed a Christian bookstore called The Bread Shop. They never reported any boiler problems or strange smells in the bookstore. From December 1988 to April of 1989, the building lay dormant, empty between tenants, and not until April was purchased by the owners of the Good and Loud music store." Chimney Doe's teeth were examined and dental charts of his teeth created by Madison forensic odontologist Don Simley for comparison against future unidentified persons. Unfortunately, at this point in time, no local missing persons reports matched Chimney Doe, police determined. Detective Grand checked lists of burglary arrests and cars towed from the area and descriptions of men who had been in the Dane County Jail. I assume that the University of Wisconsin's enrollment office was contacted to see if any students were missing from the large institution of higher learning. Police released the description of the man and the clothing, and a tip line was set up by Crime Stoppers. Scores of tips were called in, and police set about checking into each and every one. They eventually decided that Chimney Doe was likely an out-of-towner or was never reported missing. On November 13, 1989, the Chimney Doe case was featured on the national TV show Hard Copy, which reenacted a murder of Chimney Doe by showing a body being stomped in the genital area by a shadowy figure. The show generated 17 tips to the Madison Police Department. The Capital Times reported, quote, "The calls generated by Monday's episode of the news entertainment show Hard Copy came from states including California, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, and Illinois. Most were from individuals who thought they might know the identity of the victim," said Lieutenant Tim Endress. Unfortunately, none of those calls led to an identification. In October 1989, Chimney Doe's skull was sent to the FBI lab so that the federal agency's experts could attempt to reconstruct his face in a sketch that would be circulated to the public. The $10,000 cost was absorbed by the FBI. Then, in 1990, Chimney Doe's skull was sent to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. There, using funding from the FBI, 2 forensic anthropologists, working with Dr. Douglas Ubelacher, used the skull to create a plaster model of Chimney Doe's face. According to the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, "Based on the victim's race, which can be determined by bones, the experts know the average depth of tissue at various points of the face. They place depth markers on the skull and then fill in the bust with clay." End quote. They also used a computer to create a rendering of how Chimney Doe's face might have looked. Smithsonian-based experts also attempted to trace the origin of the clothing and personal items found with Chimney Doe. Detective Gran held a press conference in September 1990 releasing the facial images to the public and said, quote, "We really have kept all our theories open. We just don't have enough at this point to give us a solid course of direction of what happened. I don't know if he was dead or alive when he went into the chimney," end quote. Gran said he planned to show the image of Chimney Doe to employees in the area of the record store to see if anyone recognized him. A 1993 article in the Wisconsin State Journal reported that Chimney Doe still had not been buried. Detective James Gran had arranged for the remains to be maintained until such time as the state's crime laboratory's DNA testing facilities were updated. He wanted to arrange for DNA to be extracted before the remains were interred. Gran told the paper, quote, "We haven't had any leads all year." The same remained true in 1999. Coroner Ray Wosepka told the Wisconsin State Journal that Chimney Doe's remains were in a container in the Dane County morgue. Quote, "We have him and we're waiting for some other tests to be done before we inter him," he said, end quote. Wosepka wanted to get a DNA sample from the bones before they were cremated or buried. In 2003, Dane County Coroner John Stanley entered the case into NCIC and hoped to get Chimney Doe's DNA into the state crime lab's DNA database initiated in 1999. He was also entered into NamUs. I don't have an explanation why Chimney Doe's DNA was never extracted and never entered into any of the databases at this time. In 2013, Detective Jennifer Munt spent a lot of time investigating a tip from a woman who believed she recognized Chimney Doe as a page at the state capitol in Madison. That was a bust. Chimney Doe sat in a glorified Tupperware, waiting to be given back his name.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, the number 2, protect.gov.
In May 2018, City of Madison Police Department cold case leader Captain Jay Langfeld told Milwaukee Magazine there had been no solid new leads and little to go on since the FBI worked on the case in the 1990s. Quote, "They pushed it as far as they could have then," he said. Retired MPD Detective James Gran told Madison Magazine in 2022, quote, "It's my most frustrating case. It's a real hole in my reflection on my career," end quote. But then along came Detective Lindsay Ludden. She had grown up in Madison and knew of the Chimney Doe case along with everyone else. She became a Madison police detective in 2012, and she told me that in 2018, she asked for the Chimney Doe case to be assigned to her. She had heard of the cases that were being solved around the country by forensic genealogy, and she hoped the technique could provide a name for Chimney Doe. In December 2019, Detective Ludden connected with Margaret Press of the DNA Doe Project, whose attention was drawn to the case by two genealogists in the DDP stable, Lee and Anthony Redgrave, who went on to found the Trans Doe Task Force. It took a very long time to get through all the red tape and obtain the necessary approvals and funding to send Chimney Doe's case out for third-party analysis. Detective Ludden told Madison magazine, quote, "Ultimately, things came together in 2021 and we were able to send some evidence off," end quote. That evidence was the hair collected from Chimney Doe, which had been sitting in the MPD property room for years and years. Meanwhile, the Dane County Medical Examiner's Office was working with Bodie Technologies on extracting an STR profile from the bones of Chimney Doe in order to enter his DNA profile into the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database. But Detective Ludden needed a SNP profile for genealogy. Enter Estrella Forensics. You may remember the work Estrella Forensics did on the Judy Nesbitt case I covered, in which DNA was extracted from rootless hairs and traced back to her killer. In this case, grant money funded Estrella's work on the hairs from Chimney Doe, and when the money ran out, they continued the work pro bono. It took 2 years in all, and it's been reported that multiple attempts to extract sufficient DNA for a SNP profile failed. According to the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, "The process was lengthy and required 13 attempts to get enough human DNA to put together a decent genetic profile." Kelly Harkins Kincaid, Estrella's founder and CEO, told the publication, quote, "It just felt like this SNP profile was just out of reach. It was stumping us." She told Madison magazine, quote, "It wasn't a rock star sample right off the bat, but it wasn't a hard no. That's why I took a second look and thought, I think we might have something here." Well, finally, Estrella was able to get enough DNA to develop the SNP profile, and the case was provided to the DNA Doe Project. The DDP issued a press release in September 2022 that stated, quote, "After years of effort, the work towards an identification officially began in November 2021. Using a grant from the National Institutes of Justice, Estrella Forensics of Santa Cruz, California successfully extracted a DNA sample from rootless hair, one of the most difficult biological samples to get DNA from. This case, originally referred to the DNA Doe Project in 2019 by the Trans Doe's Task Force, is close to the hearts of many volunteers of the DDP due to the mysterious circumstances, as well as the belief that the skeleton may belong to a transgender person. Early DNA testing revealed that this Doe was assigned male at birth," end quote. So DNA confirmed that Dr. Bennett was right all those years ago. Chimney Doe was a man. The DDP's work on this case was fully funded by the generosity of their donors. If you go to their website, you can help fund a case. Their genealogists are all volunteers. After funding was complete, the SNP profile was uploaded to GEDmatch Pro and Family Tree DNA. The top match shared 421 centimorgans with Chimney Doe, and the second match shared 275. As listeners know, 421 centimorgans is a pretty good start. This means the DNA relative is likely a second cousin or similar relationship to the unknown subject. It took 6 months of building family trees of both sets of great-grandparents to identify Chimney Doe. DDP members met with the Madison investigators and named a candidate they believed was Chimney Doe. The DNA Doe Project's press release says, quote, "Ronnie Joe Kirk, who had been adopted, presented a unique challenge in tracing his familial connections. This was such a unique case with adoption and multiple generations of different marriages, despite having a relatively close DNA relative match in the family," said team leader Gwen Knapp. "The shrewd genealogy work done by my team was amazing to tease out the various relationships. We're so excited that we can give Ronnie Kirk his name back and hope his family has some closure for Ronnie being missing for so long," end quote. At a press conference announcing the identification of Ronnie Joe Kirk, Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes said they had contacted Ronnie's family, who expressed that they were thankful to finally know what had happened to him and requested that their privacy be protected. Police released a photo of Ronnie, which they had obtained from the family, who said it was taken sometime in the early 1960s when Ronnie would have been just about 20 years old. Ronnie Joe Kirk's parents of record at his birth on October 27, 1942, were Des Moines Kirk, who was 54 years old, and his wife Nora Elizabeth Parrott Kirk, who was 49. They lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Des Moines and Nora had 3 much older children. Their daughter Nora was 20 years older than Ronnie. Daughter Kathleen was 23 years older than Ronnie, and son Harold was 28 years older. Des Moines also had a way older son named CJ from a previous relationship. Ronnie was partially raised by his sister Nora. She is referred to as his ward in a 1943 Tulsa Tribune article that says, quote, "How many children can whistle at 15 months? Ronnie not only can, but he's been doing it for 60 days. Ward of Mrs. Nora Kirk, 419 South Frisco Avenue, Ronnie learned to whistle before he could even talk well," end quote. I'm not going to get into the details of the adoption of Ronnie, a fact confirmed by the DDP. You can make your own inferences based on the information I'm giving you about him and his family. A January 1948 blurb in the Tulsa World court column reported a new adoption case in re adoption of Ronnie Joe Kirk, but doesn't mention the adoptive parent's name. A June 1957 Tulsa World article reports that 14-year-old Ronnie Joe Kirk was treated at the hospital for a fractured hip after being hit by a car. He was riding his motor scooter at the time, 5:23 p.m., at 5th and Guthrie when the accident happened. In the article, Ronnie is listed as the son of Mr. and Mrs. Des Moines Kirk of West 5th Street. Then, subsequently, Des Moines Kirk filed a lawsuit on Ronnie's behalf against Al's Messenger Service for personal injury seeking $1,500, almost certainly for the motor scooter accident. Ronnie's mother of record, Nora, died in June 1957 at age 63. And then in December of the same year, 1957, her husband, Des Moines, a retired refinery employee who owned and operated some parking lots, died of a heart attack at age 69. His survivors, according to his obituary, were his daughters Kathleen and Nora, and 3 sons, H.L. Kirk of Porterville, California, C.L. Kirk of Kermit, Texas, and Ronnie Joe Kirk of the home. So now, at age 15, Ronnie was without a parental home. I imagine he went to live with one of his sisters, as her husband, Ray Bounds of North Osage Drive, was later listed as a ward to Ronnie. In May 1958, Ronnie was listed as one of the 8th grade graduates from Ponca Military Academy. In September 1958, an article in Tulsa World listed Ronnie as one of 5 youths being held by the Tulsa PD on suspicion of auto theft. The 5 were runaways who had stolen a car to go to California and then turned themselves in at the police station. I read that one of the other kids was one of his sister's children, but I cannot confirm that. The article says the boys had been arrested several times before, at least once for boosting a car. 15-year-old Ronnie Joe Kirk was listed as living on North Osage Drive. A blurb in the papers in July 1959 references a guardian appointment for Ronnie Joe Kirk. By August 1959, Tulsa World reported that the guardian of the estate of minor Ronnie Joe Kirk, this was Ray Bounds, his brother-in-law, put a piece of property in Tulsa up for sale to the highest bidder. The property was mortgaged, so it's unclear whether the sale benefited Ronnie at all. Ronnie attended high school in Oklahoma and spent some time in the military. He married Angela Lucille N. on June 7, 1962 in Oklahoma. They had a baby girl together, but by August 1963, Angela filed for divorce and child custody with support. The divorce was granted in October of that year. Meanwhile, in April 1963, the Portageville Reporter reported that 20-year-old Ronnie Joe Kirk filed a false police report claiming to have been beaten up and robbed. In December 1966, Ronnie married a woman named Jacqueline. I can confirm that he had one child with her based on this excerpt from the Wisconsin State Journal. Quote, "His last known contact with relatives was in 1970 when he divorced his second wife in Missouri, according to police spokesperson Stephanie Fryer. He had 2 children at that point, one with his first wife and another with his second wife. The children, now in their 50s, didn't know each other until investigators contacted them." End quote. It's a little misleading to say the last known contact with him was in 1970. The Wisconsin State Journal reported that 1970 divorce documents showed Ronnie Joe Kirk was a factory worker and had deserted his wife and child. He missed a court date relating to the divorce proceeding Jacqueline filed. That same paper contained a repeating legal notice on 3 dates in January 1970, noticing Ronnie Joe Kirk that he had to respond to the complaint filed by Dale Thompson, the, quote, guardian ad litem, a person appointed by a court to represent the interests of a minor child in a family court case against Ronnie Joe Kirk, end quote. Jacqueline Kirk was the plaintiff. The notice was for the Family County Court in Dane County. So even though Ronnie Joe Kirk's last known address was in Tulsa, he must have been known to have been living in Wisconsin. Ronnie Joe Kirk never appeared in court. If a missing persons report was filed for him, investigators have not been able to locate it. I imagine the divorce was granted to Jacqueline and custody of their child awarded to her, as Ronnie didn't show up to contest any of it. Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes told WMTV that the notice in the Wisconsin State Journal was, quote, the most recent known record investigators have of him alive. Someone will remember him, and we'll do everything that we can to try to trace down if he worked here, if he lived here, or if he was just passing through, end quote. I spoke with the detective currently working the Ronnie Joe Kirk case, Crimes Against Persons case detective Lindsay Luddett. She told me that her agency is currently engaged in the painstaking process of trying to figure out Ronnie Joe Kirk's last known whereabouts. He is believed to have spent time in Oklahoma, Alabama, California, North Carolina, and Texas. The question is whether he also had ties to Wisconsin. Property, tax, and employment records from that time are all on microfiche in musty, dank basements. As of right now, the investigators cannot confirm that Ronnie Joe Kirk was ever living in Madison. The notice in the paper is the only clue that they have. That and the fact that he was found dead in a chimney there in 1989, 19 years after that paper notice appeared. But of course, the question of whether Ronnie Joe Kirk was living in Madison is a question of lesser importance than the one we all want to know the answer to. Was he murdered? The situation of the chimney unfortunately does not help answer that question. The building that Ronnie was found in was a single-story building with a low chimney on the roof. There were no fire escapes or ladders providing easy access. But Madison Magazine reported that Steve Lethan, who owned the building housing the Good and Loud music store, gave the OG detective James Grand some photos from when the building was for sale that showed discarded appliances staggered and stacked against the back wall. It was almost like there were stepping stones that would give you access to the roof, Grand told the magazine. The area where the building was located was a known late-night hangout spot, and the stacked items could have provided easy roof access to someone. Whether that someone was toting the diminutive dead or unconscious body of Ronnie Joe Kirk to stash him in the chimney, or whether that someone was Ronnie Joe Kirk, armed with a lock-defeating butter knife, hoping to break into the music store by entering through the chimney, we just don't know. The building has since been demolished, so all modern detectives have to go on are photos and one very ancient video of the scene. At the press conference announcing the identification of Ronnie Joe Kirk, Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes reminded everyone of what they were up against in terms of solving this case. Valuable information may be gone, Barnes told reporters. It was a skeleton when we found it, so time of death is going to be difficult, not to mention cause of death. Detective Ludden tells me that she prefers to label Ronnie Joe Kirk's case a suspicious death. Her agency, the Madison Police, has renewed their investigation into what happened to Ronnie Joe Kirk. There's that renewed momentum, Detective Ludden said in an interview. We finally have a name. But what they don't have is any specific evidence of murder. You heard me say that young Ronnie Joe Kirk broke his hip bone in a motor scooter accident when he was a kid. Could his hip have been vulnerable and easily broken by a fall down the chimney? Could the 1989 anthropologist who examined Chimney Doe have been mistaken about the fractures to the hips being fresh? He certainly seems to have been mistaken about the time of death. It was estimated to be no more than 2 years before Chimney Doe was found. But in 1989, when his skeleton emerged from the chimney, Ronnie Joe Kirk had not been seen alive for 19 years or more. But the anthropologist does seem to have been correct in his estimation that Chimney Doe was only in his 20s. Ronnie Joe Kirk was 27 in 1969. As a result of all the conflicting information of light of what is now known about Ronnie Joe Kirk, Detective Ludden has requested that the Dane County Medical Examiner re-examine his skeletal remains, still in the possession of that agency, to try to provide some more concrete answers as to Ronnie Joe Kirk's time and manner of death. My own personal theory, and this is based on zero expertise, just a moderate case of claustrophobia, is that no one in their right minds would go down that chimney voluntarily. Detective Ludden told me there's no way to tell whether Ronnie went into the chimney head first or feet first. Madison Police Cold Case Team Leader Captain Jay Langfeld told Milwaukee Magazine in 2018 that I think it was a burglary, but others are convinced it was a homicide. Either way, I cannot imagine a worse fate than getting stuck in there alive. As for the original theory of the case, that Chimney Doe was a crossdresser who was killed in a hate crime, well, the new possible date of death of the late 1960s or early 1970 puts the clothing found in the chimney with Ronnie Joe Kirk in a very different context. To put it bluntly, in 1969, men were wearing a lot more funky, flowery, flowy stuff than they were in the late 80s, the Miami Vice era. Take a look at some photos of the members of the band The Monkees in the late 60s. Thank you to Web Sleuth member Friday Fan for pointing this out. And you'll see men wearing paisley caftans with belts. The DDP press release says, quote, "We have found no evidence to suggest Ronnie ever identified as anything other than male," said co-team leader Megan Pasica. The reality is the paisley garment found in the chimney was a mess of stained, tattered rags that had to be pieced together, and guesses that it was a kind of dress worn by a woman were just that, guesses. Not only that, but we don't even know that Chimney Doe was wearing it. It could have been thrown down the chimney with him. Detective Ludden believes the quote-unquote dress may have been misinterpreted and derailed the investigation a little bit. By the way, any chance of DNA on any of these items is minute. The clothing was sitting in a boiler ventilating chimney getting heated for potentially many years. It's a miracle Estrella and Bodie were able to obtain DNA from the hair and bones of Ronnie Joe Kirk. The FBI has issued a VICAP alert seeking information about Ronnie's case. If anyone listening has any information regarding the life and whereabouts of Ronnie Joe Kirk since 1968, please contact Detective Lindsay Ludden at 608-229-8215. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.